Welcome back to the Writing of God and the main event of first century Christianity, the Jesus Revolution and the Hebrew Gospels. And we'll look at the Hebrew markers, what things were different from the Hebrew Gospels and the Greek Gospels. And we'll show you word by word, and what does that mean to our faith? And what does that expand our knowledge of first century Christianity in the time of Yeshua HaMashiach? Stay with us. We're starting right now. Welcome back to the main event, where we bring the living, dynamic presence of Yehovah and His Son, Yeshua the Messiah, into my life, into your life, and into the lives of all the people that we touch. Now, in our last episode, we talked about the authenticity of the Hebrew Gospels, because the way we get to the living presence of the living God is by going back to the fountainhead of the original text, the Hebrew Gospels. And we talked about their authenticity, and we're going to talk about it some more. Recently, in the past few weeks, I made a pilgrimage, a research expedition to Europe, and blazed through several of the major libraries in a 30-day blitz to find that my suspicion that my conviction really that there were more Hebrew texts of the Hebrew Gospels out there that had never been brought to light, including spending time at the Vatican with the texts I had already recovered and have been translating for the past several years, the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia. Well, I arrived in England. The next day I got up and went to the Cambridge University Library, asked for the Hebrew manuscript tradition, their Hebrew catalog, and there were five new manuscripts of the Hebrew Gospels that had never ever been reported before. They've never been digitized, so very few people have seen these for probably about 500 years. So these manuscripts I obtained copies of, and I brought them back, and we're going to talk about them today. But first, we're going to talk about the journey of the Hebrew Gospels, and we're going to review again our criteria for authenticating the truth of the Gospels as coming from a first century source. Remember, the Bible you have in your hand probably has a copyright no more than 20 years old. So how do you know that that is the true authentic Word of God? You know because of the origin, the proof of the origin of that copy. So it's not the copy, it's the origin, the original document that proves the authenticity of the Word. So we're going to talk about the journey of the Hebrew Gospels. The Hebrew Gospels were taken to Spain during the flight of the Messianic Church from Jerusalem to Pella, and then many immigrated on to Sepharad, which is Spain, which had the largest community of Jews and Messianic Christians of any place in the world. It was called the New Jerusalem. Now, in Spain, it existed there. We have historical attestation of the fact that the Hebrew Gospels had survived. They did exist. They were being used during that whole period of time up into the Middle Ages. And at that point, in about 15th century, 1492 in particular, some very, very significant events happened. Number one, the King Ferdinand and Isabel of Spain reconquered those Muslim parts of Spain that had remained. They finished the Reconquista from the Muslim warriors that had taken over Spain in the 8th century. The second thing, they immediately turned their attention to expel all of the Jews from Spain. And there were about 500,000 Jews in Sepharad at the time. Half of them had converted to Christianity. So you had a huge resurgence of the Messianic Church in Spain during the Middle Ages. They implemented the Inquisition to crush this resurgence of the Messianic Church because it was different. It used a different book. Guess what book it used? It used the Hebrew Gospels of the word. That had to be crushed in the minds of the apostate church at the time. So in 1492 was the deadline. August of 1492 was the deadline for the Jews exiting Spain. The Messianic Christians were also trying to get out of Spain as well, the Jewish Christians, because they were fleeing the Inquisition. So when Columbus' ship left, it left with a crew full of Jews and Messianics. We know. We have his list of who was on the boat. They also carried with them a Hebrew translator and a Greek map, because they were fully expecting to run into the lost tribes of Israel in the New World that they were going to. So those Messianics, in all likelihood, brought copies of the Hebrew Gospels with them to the New World. In fact, the New World was inordinately populated with refugees from the Messianic converts in Spain and the Jews that had been expelled. So a large number of the earliest colonists in the Americans, like 15%, were of this Jewish and Messianic group. In some places, like in Jamaica, 50% of the population were Jews and Messianics. And they brought their texts with them, and they played an enormous part in the history of the New World, just as they did in the Old World. Information, a story you have never been told, but that's going to start anew here. You're going to hear about the survival of the Messianic Church and the Hebrew Gospels throughout the centuries. The greatest story never told. So when the Messianics exited Spain, they took the Hebrew Gospels with them, right? And in about 40 years, it ended up, the copy that we have, ended up in the Vatican Library. And it was bound beneath another manuscript in Hebrew called the Tales of Sindabar. So unless you read the first 100 pages, you would not know that you had a Hebrew Gospel in your hand. Well, nobody did read it. The church was not encouraging the study of Hebrew. So for 500 years, this document sat in the Vatican Library undiscovered until 1956. After the Holocaust, after many attitudes toward the Jews and the Hebrew Gospels had changed dramatically. Otherwise, we don't know if we would have ever seen them again. So what happened is our Messianic Christians left Jerusalem, and this is mentioned in Luke, when the armies of the prince encircled the city, flee, and they fled to Pella. And the entire Messianic church was led there. Many came back to Jerusalem. Many stayed in Pella in Jordan and settled there, and many others immigrated to Sepharad. In 1971, excavators of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre broke into a second century room of the church that had previously been unknown. Now, at this time, the Messianic church was still predominant in Israel, but they were being pressured and forced to immigrate because of the rising tide of anti-Semitism of the Greek Gentile church. So when they broke into this room, they found a message, a picture of a sailing vessel, and a message that said in Latin, Domine ibimus. God, we went. Where did they go? Well, they sailed across the sea to Sepharad, where the largest community of Jews and Messianic Jews and Jewish Christians were living. In 1492 was the pivotal year when Jews were expelled from Spain and the Messianic Christians were leaving as well, fleeing the Inquisition, taking their Hebrew Gospels with them. Right after 1492 and 1493 and 1494, there were 4 blood moons on the feast days of Passover and Sukkot for 2 years in a row. This is a celestial event that has always always signaled danger for the nation of Israel. This did not repeat itself for 500 years until the present day, when we have had 3 of these events in the past century. At the independence of Israel, during the war, when the 5 armies of the Arabs moved against them, and just a few years ago during the Hamas tunnel war against Israel, we have had a repeat of these 4 blood moons on the feast days of Passover and Sukkot 2 years in a row. So the last time we saw this was 500 years ago, when the Hebrews, fleeing the traumatic event of the expulsion, used these Hebrew Gospels as their comfort and solace and their ritual during those dark days. The very copy that we have today that was not used for 500 years, has not been seen for 500 years until I began to translate it a few years ago. And from the Vatican, that document found its way into my hot little hands. And I've been translating it ever since. This is the trail of the Hebrew Gospels. There were surviving Hebrew Gospels in Spain. We know that. We've been told that by historians and scholars that have written about it. 2 things came out of it. It was translated into Catalan for those in the area of Catalonia, for those Hebrews that no longer could speak their own sacred tongue. So we've got more on this, but you're going to have to wait till the next episode of the main event. That was an incredible episode, wasn't it? The authenticity of the Hebrew Gospels and the markers of the Hebrew text. Fabulous. Next, we're going to be seeing the witness that comes from Cochin, India, where St. Thomas took the Hebrew Gospels to India. So you need to grab your personal study journal so you can keep up with us, follow what we're doing, and be able to talk about it with everybody you know. We will see you on the next episode of The Writing of God. Are you trying to find the original experience of the first century church that revolutionized the world, the Jesus Revolution? Well, the best way to do that is to study the original word of the Messiah that they used, the Hebrew Gospels, which has recently been recovered, several manuscripts, and we have it for you to study on video, in workbook, in a book form, so that you can master the basics of the Hebrew Gospels, how they're different, what that tells us about our Hebrew Messiah. Everything we know about our Hebrew Messiah comes to us through a Greek filter, a different language, culture, and thought. Our Messiah was Hebrew, and these are the original words of our Savior in the Jesus movement of the first century. And this is something you can discover for yourself and see it in detail. All of these manuscripts translated and their intricacies and their differences explained to you in order to build a faith based on the original words of the Messiah. Go to writingofgod.com to get your copy. Again, this is appropriate for high school students or adults. It comes with the book, The Sons of Zion, on the history of the Messianic Church, the early church, and the study of the manuscript, all on video and in book form and workbooks.
That's online at thewritingofgod.com. That's online at thewritingofgod.com.
The Unveiled, Rediscovering the Zadokite Covenant of the First 3,000, reveals to us a major archaeological breakthrough covering missing pages, missing centuries of history regarding the Zadok priesthood. Now it comes in both the book and a 9-part video series. Buy the book, save money, get started on this incredible journey. Do it today.
Will you seek the Lord about becoming a partner to bring the message of the Writing of God to more people? Send your gift to The Writing of God, P.O. Box 294047, Kerrville, Texas 78029, or online at thewritingofgod.com. That's The Writing of God, P.O. Box 294047, Kerrville, Texas 78029, or online at thewritingofgod.com.